November 12th, 2024. Fred Hough sat on the wooden steps of his porch at 6:17 in the morning, shoulders hunched against the raw Nebraska wind, a stack of foreclosure notices clenched in his weathered hands. 68 years old, tended the same 180 acres his grandfather had cleared with mules and determination. And in exactly 23 days, 3 generations of Hough family legacy would belong to the bank. The wheat fields, the red barn his father raised, the house where his children were born. All of it. The mug of black coffee beside him had filmed over with cold, but Fred's calloused fingers kept returning to it, each bitter sip tasting like ashes and defeat. 3 consecutive years of drought had turned his soil to dust. Equipment that should have been replaced a decade ago kept breaking down, each repair bleeding money he didn't have. Grain prices had collapsed so far below production costs that every bushel he harvested deepened the hole. He'd weathered the brutal 80s when half his neighbors went under, outlasted the 93 floods that swallowed fields whole, clawed through 2008 when credit dried up overnight. But this time, the math was simple and merciless. There was no miracle left. Then he heard something that didn't make sense. Engines. Deep, throaty diesel engines. Not one, not 2, but a rolling thunder of them approaching from the county road. Fred's head lifted, confusion cutting through his exhaustion as the sound grew louder. His arthritic hand found the porch railing and he pulled himself to his feet, squinting through the golden dawn light at his gravel driveway. What he saw made him grip the railing harder, knuckles going white. 18-wheelers, one after another, each cab pulling a flatbed stacked with green and yellow iron wrapped in factory plastic, rolling onto his property in a procession that seemed to have no end. 50 brand-new John Deere tractors gleaming in the early morning sun, arriving like an answer to a prayer he'd stopped believing anyone was listening to. November 12th, 2024. Fred Hough had been standing on his porch for 20 minutes, watching the sun climb over his wheat fields for what he believed would be the last time as their owner. The bankruptcy papers sat on the railing where he'd set them, their edges fluttering in the cold November wind. In 23 days, someone else would watch this sunrise from this porch. The sound started as a distant rumble, barely audible over the wind. Fred's stomach dropped. The repo crew. They weren't supposed to come for another 3 weeks, but maybe the bank had decided to get a jump on seizing his equipment. The first semi-truck appeared at the end of his driveway, turning off the county road with its amber running lights cutting through the morning mist. Then a second truck. Then a third. Fred's breath caught. 4, 5, 7, 10. They kept coming. The lead truck rolled up his gravel drive, its air brakes hissing as it stopped 30 feet from his porch. Fred could see what it was hauling now, something massive wrapped in white protective plastic, but the distinctive green and yellow were unmistakable beneath. John Deere tractors. Brand new John Deere tractors. A man in his early 50s climbed down from the cab carrying a clipboard. "Morning, sir. You Fred Hough?" Fred's voice came out rough. "I am. Got a delivery for you. 50 John Deere 8R410 tractors. Where would you like us to start unloading?" The world tilted. Fred grabbed the porch post. "There's been a mistake." "No mistake, sir. Delivery to Fred Hough, this address. Purchased 3 weeks ago, paid in full." The driver looked up from his clipboard. $6,400,000. Cash transaction. $6 million. Fred sat down hard on the porch steps. "Paid by who?" The driver shrugged. "Can't tell you, sir. Just have the delivery address and payment confirmation." He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. "But there's this. Says to give it to you personally." Fred took it with trembling hands. His name was written on the front in neat, careful letters. "Sir, where can we put these tractors?" "The north field," Fred managed. 40 acres. The convoy began to move. Truck after truck pulled into Fred's field, air brakes hissing, hydraulic lifts whining as they unloaded tractor after tractor. Tom Bradshaw's pickup came tearing up the county road, stopping in the middle of it. Tom got out and just stood there, staring. He walked up the driveway like a man in a dream. "Fred, what in the hell is going on?" "I don't know, Tom. They just started showing up." Tom counted the trucks, lost count, started over. "That's got to be 50 tractors. Fred, that's $6 million sitting in your field." $6,400,000, Fred said numbly. Tom sat down beside him. By who? Fred looked at the envelope in his shaking hands. He tried to open it, fumbled, dropped it. Tom picked it up, handed it back. Fred tried again, finally tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Fred, you gave me a future when I had none. You saw me when I was invisible. You risked everything to give me safety and dignity when the world wanted me to disappear. This is only a fraction of what you gave me. These tractors are paid for. They're yours. You don't remember me, but I have never forgotten you. Not for a single day in 30 years. Thank you for teaching me that one person's courage can change everything. The note wasn't signed. Fred read it 3 times, his vision blurring. Tom read over his shoulder. 30 years ago, Tom said quietly. 1994. Who did you help in 1994? Fred shook his head, wiping his eyes. His voice came out broken. I don't know, Tom. I don't remember. He looked up at the field of tractors, a fortune in machinery that had appeared like a miracle. Who did I help that I can't even remember? Fred called the bank at 8:47 that morning, his voice still shaking. Linda Chen, the manager who delivered his foreclosure notice, answered on the second ring. Linda, this is Fred Hough. I need to discuss the bankruptcy. Mr. Hough, I understand this is difficult, but the proceedings are. I can pay it off, all of it. I need you to stop the foreclosure. Silence. Then carefully. Mr. Hough, your debt is $287,000. Do you have access to those funds? Fred looked out at the field of tractors. I have $6 million in equipment sitting in my north field right now. I think I can manage $287,000. Linda arrived 2 hours later in her Lexus, stepping out onto Fred's gravel driveway and stopping dead when she saw the tractors. She walked among them then like she was touring a museum, touching the green metal, checking VIN numbers against her phone. When she came back to the porch, her professional composure had cracked. Mr. Hough, where did these come from? Fred showed her the note. She read it twice, looked at the tractors, then back at him. Someone anonymously gave you this? Apparently. Sir, each of these is worth over $120,000. This is extraordinary. She paused. Do you know who sent them? No. The word came out heavy with frustration. That's the problem. After Linda left with promises to halt the foreclosure, Fred went inside and pulled out everything Sarah had kept. Photo albums with cracked spines, boxes of old tax records, spiral notebooks where she'd tracked seasonal workers, names, dates, wages paid. Sarah had been meticulous about records in a way Fred never was. He made a list. Every person he could remember helping over the decades. Hitchhikers he'd given rides to, neighbors' kids who'd needed summer work, drifters who'd shown up looking for a meal and stayed for harvest. By noon, he had 31 names. He called his daughter Rebecca in Denver. Honey, do you remember anyone Dad helped back in the 90s? Anyone who might have been desperate, needed shelter or work? Rebecca thought for a long time. Dad, you helped everyone. I can't think of anyone specific. Tom Bradshaw couldn't remember either. Neither could the old farmhands Fred tracked down. Everyone gave the same answer. Fred helped too many people to isolate just one. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from a law firm in San Francisco. Inside was a single page on expensive letterhead. Mr. Hough, the tractors were purchased through a trust. My client wishes to remain anonymous. If you choose to sell any equipment, the proceeds are yours, with no restrictions or obligations. It was signed by an attorney named Richard Morrison. Fred stared at the letter, then at his list of 31 names, none of them feeling right. Someone out there remembered him perfectly, and he couldn't remember them at all. October 1994. Fred Hough was 38 years old, and the farm was struggling but surviving. Sarah was still alive then, still keeping her meticulous records, still believing they could make it work if they just held on long enough. The blizzard hit on October 12th, weeks earlier than any weather forecast predicted. 3 feet of snow in 18 hours. Fred's late wheat crop, still standing in the fields waiting for harvest, was buried. He'd lose everything if he couldn't get it out before the ground froze solid. He found her 2 days later when he went to the barn to start the tractor. A sound, barely audible over the wind, someone crying. Fred grabbed a pitchfork, thinking maybe a coyote had gotten in. But it wasn't an animal, it was a girl, 16, maybe 17, huddled in the corner behind old hay bales. Hispanic, wearing clothes too thin for Nebraska winter. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. She looked at him with such terror that Fred set the pitchfork down immediately. "Easy," he said softly. "Easy, I'm not going to hurt you." She said something in Spanish, her voice breaking. Fred didn't speak Spanish, but he understood fear in any language. "Elena," she finally managed in broken English. "My name Elena." She'd run from a migrant labor camp 30 miles south. The crew boss had been violent. She was undocumented, terrified, had nowhere to go. She'd been hiding in Fred's barn for 2 days, eating nothing, freezing. Fred made a choice that could have cost him everything. He brought her to the house. Sarah was horrified at first. "Fred, she's illegal. If anyone finds out, she's 16 and half frozen. Look at her face, Sarah. Look at what someone did to her." Sarah looked, and Sarah's horror transformed into something else. She got Elena warm clothes, made her soup, set up the spare bedroom. Elena stayed through December. She worked the harvest alongside Fred, learning equipment operation, never complaining even when the cold was brutal. Sarah taught her English at the kitchen table every night. They paid her fairly, fed her at their table, treated her like the daughter they'd never had. Fred never asked about her immigration status. He just saw a kid who needed help. In late December, Elena told them she had to leave. She'd saved enough for a bus ticket to California, heard there were jobs there, maybe a chance at community college. Sarah packed food for the trip, gave Elena her warmest coat. Fred drove her to the bus station in Ogallala, pressed an extra $100 into her hand. "You deserve a future, Elena," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." She hugged him, crying, "I never forget you, Mr. Fred. Never." Then she got on the bus, and Fred never saw her again. Day 7. Fred sat on the floor of his bedroom at 2 a.m, surrounded by boxes he'd pulled from the closet. Sarah's things. 5 years after her death, he still couldn't bring himself to give most of it away. At the bottom of her old cedar hope chest, beneath quilts and baby clothes from when Rebecca was small, he found a photo album he'd never seen before. Sarah's private collection, pictures she'd kept separate from the family albums downstairs. He opened it carefully, and on the 3rd page he stopped breathing. October 1994. A harvest photo. Fred standing next to the combine, dirt on his face, exhausted smile, and in the background, slightly out of focus, a teenage girl loading wheat into a truck. Dark hair pulled back, shy smile, wearing one of Sarah's old flannel shirts that was too big for her thin frame. Fred turned the photo over with trembling hands. Sarah's neat handwriting, "Elena, first harvest. Brave girl, Elena." The memory hit him like a physical blow. The blizzard. The girl in the barn with the bruised face. 3 months of her working alongside him, learning English from Sarah, eating at their table. Her tears at the bus station. "I never forget you, Mr. Fred." Fred grabbed his laptop with shaking hands, typed Elena Vasquez, Nebraska into Google. Nothing useful. Then Elena Vasquez, CEO. The screen flooded with results. The first article made his heart stop. Elena Vasquez, founder and CEO of Teleconnect Solutions, named to Forbes billionaire list, net worth $2.8 billion. He clicked the link. A professional photograph loaded. A woman in her mid-40s, confident smile, wearing an expensive suit. But Fred saw past the polish and success to the frightened 16-year-old who'd hidden in his barn. The biography was stunning. Undocumented immigrant, community college in California, working 3 jobs, full scholarship to Stanford. Founded Teleconnect in 2001, building telecommunications infrastructure in rural communities. Took the company public in 2019. Current net worth $2.8 billion. Known for aggressive advocacy for immigrant rights and technology access in underserved areas. Fred scrolled through images. Elena speaking at conferences. Elena testifying before Congress. Elena receiving humanitarian awards. Every photo showed the same thing. A woman who'd transformed herself from invisible to impossible. He found a recent interview. Elena's words. "Someone once told me I deserved a future when everyone else wanted me to disappear. I built my entire life on that belief. Everything I do is to prove that one person's courage to help can change everything." Fred stared at the professional photo on his screen, then down at the faded snapshot in his hand. The scared girl in the oversized flannel shirt. The billionaire CEO who'd never forgotten the farmer who gave her a chance. Tears streamed down his weathered face. "Alina," he whispered. "My God, Alina, look what you became." Fred called Richard Morrison at 8 a.m. California time, his hands steadier than they'd been in days. "Mr. Morrison, this is Fred Hough. I know who your client is. It's Elena Vasquez." A long pause. "Mr. Hough, I cannot confirm or deny." "I'm not asking you to confirm. I'm asking you to pass along a message." Fred's voice cracked. Tell her she didn't owe me anything. I just did what was right. Tell her I'm proud of who she became. Tell her Sarah would be proud too." Morrison's professional tone softened. "I'll pass that along, Mr. Hough." Fred couldn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper, trying to write what he wanted to say, crossing out words, starting over. "Elena, if it's you, you didn't owe me anything. I just did what any decent person would do. But thank you. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for becoming who you are." He never finished the letter. At 11:07 p.m., his phone rang. California number. Fred's heart hammered as he answered. "Hello? Mr. Hough?" The voice was older, polished, but underneath it Fred heard the frightened teenager from 30 years ago. "Fred, it's me. It's Elena." Fred's vision blurred. "Elena." She broke down immediately, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to stay anonymous. I just didn't know if you'd remember me, if you'd even want to hear from me, and I didn't want you to feel obligated." "Elena, breathe. It's okay. It's okay." They talked for 47 minutes, both crying, both laughing, both reaching across 3 decades to find the connection still intact. Elena told him everything. How she'd worked 3 jobs in California, saved every penny for community college. How she'd carried his words with her. "You deserve a future." How she'd built Teleconnect on the principle that everyone, especially those society makes invisible, deserves access and opportunity. "You saved my life, Fred. Not just that winter, my entire life. You gave me dignity when I had none. You looked at me and saw a person worth saving. Do you understand? You're why I'm here. You're why any of this exists." Fred wiped his eyes. "I just gave you work and a warm place to sleep. You gave me hope. You gave me the belief that I mattered." Her voice broke. "Fred, I'm flying to Nebraska tomorrow. I need to see you. I need to thank you in person. Is that okay?" "Yes," Fred whispered. "Yes, Elena, please come home." After they hung up, Fred sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. He picked up the framed photo of Sarah from the counter, the one taken the year before she died. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for teaching me to see people. Thank you for helping her. Thank you for everything." Outside, 50 tractors gleamed in the moonlight. Tomorrow, the girl from the barn was coming home. The rental SUV pulled into Fred's driveway at 2:30 p.m. the next day. Not a limousine, not a Tesla, just a plain Chevy Tahoe. Elena had refused to make it fancy. Fred stood on his porch in his work clothes, the same black cap, the same blue plaid flannel shirt he'd worn for 40 years. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. The SUV door opened. A woman stepped out. 46 years old, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair streaked with gray. She looked successful, confident, like someone who'd testified before Congress and built billion-dollar companies, but her hands were trembling. She walked toward the porch slowly, and Fred could see she was crying before she even reached the steps. They stood 5 feet apart, 30 years collapsing into a single frozen moment. "Mr. Hough, Elena's voice broke. Fred opened his arms. She crossed the distance in 2 steps and crashed into him, sobbing like the 16-year-old girl who'd hidden in his barn. Fred held her tight, this woman who'd become impossible, and cried into her hair while she shook in his arms. "I never forgot," she sobbed. "Not one day, not one single day in 30 years. "I know," Fred whispered. "I know, Elena. I remember now. I remember everything." They stood there in his driveway for a long time, both crying, both holding on like they were afraid to let go. Finally, Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes, laughing through tears. "I'm sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't fall apart." "Too late for both of us," Fred said, wiping his own face. They sat on the porch steps where Fred had read her note a week ago. In the distance, 50 tractors gleamed in the afternoon sun. Elena told him everything. How she'd taken that bus to California with $347 in her pocket and Sarah's coat wrapped around her. How she'd worked as a hotel maid, a dishwasher, a night janitor. How she'd enrolled in community college. terrified they'd discover she was undocumented. How a professor had noticed her gift for mathematics and coding, helped her apply to Stanford, fought for her scholarship. I got my green card through a special program for students with exceptional skills, she said. Became a citizen in 2003. Started Teleconnect in 2004 with $8,000 in savings and a dream to bring internet access to rural communities like this one, places everyone else ignored. Fred shook his head in wonder. Elena, you built an empire. I built it on what you taught me, Fred. Every business decision, every risk I took, every person I hired. I thought about you. About how you looked at me that morning in the barn and saw a person, not an illegal immigrant. About how you and Sarah treated me like family when I had no family. About how you paid me fairly when you barely had money yourselves. About what you said at the bus station, you deserve a future. Her voice broke again. Fred, you gave me the foundation for everything. Dignity, worth, belief that I mattered. And I wanted you to know that it worked. That your kindness didn't disappear into nothing. It grew into this. She gestured at the tractors, but Fred understood she meant more than that. She meant Teleconnect. She meant the thousands of people she'd employed. She meant the immigrant advocacy work, the scholarships, the communities she'd connected. Every person I've helped, Elena whispered, is because you helped me first. Elena stayed until sunset, and as the light turned golden across the wheat fields, she told Fred about the work that had consumed her life. Teleconnect isn't just about profit, she said. We bring high-speed internet to rural communities that the big companies ignore. Places like this. Places where kids can't do homework because there's no broadband, where farmers can't access precision agriculture technology, where small businesses die because they can't compete online. Fred nodded slowly. You're connecting the forgotten places. The invisible places, like I was invisible. Elena pulled out her phone, showed him photos. The Vasquez Foundation, we've helped over 8,000 immigrants with education funding, legal aid, job training. Last year alone, we placed 340 undocumented youth in college programs with full scholarships and legal support. She swiped to another screen. This is the Hough program, named after you. Started it in 2015, specifically helps undocumented teenagers who've escaped dangerous situations, labor camps, abusive homes, trafficking. We give them what you gave me, safety, work, education, dignity. We've helped 127 kids so far. Fred stared at the screen, his throat tight. You named a program after me? You're the reason it exists, Fred. My entire philosophy comes from you. Help one person, really help them, and you're not just saving one life. You're saving all the lives that person will touch. It multiplies. 1 becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 1,000. Fred shook his head, overwhelmed. Elena, I just let you work the harvest. I didn't do anything special. Sarah gave you a coat. I gave you a bus ticket. That's it. Elena turned to face him fully, her eyes intense. Fred, listen to me. You saw me. Do you understand? When everyone else looked through me like I was invisible, like I was trash, like I was a problem to be solved or removed, you looked at me. You saw a scared kid who needed help. You treated me like I mattered, like I had value, like I deserved dignity and safety and a future. Her voice broke. Do you understand what that does to a terrified 16-year-old who's been told her entire life that she's worthless? Who's been beaten and exploited and told she's nothing but an illegal? You gave me my humanity back, Fred. You made me believe I could be something. That's not nothing. That's everything. Fred wiped his eyes, unable to speak. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check for $1.5 million, made out to Fred Hough. The tractors keep you farming, she said quietly. This money gives you freedom to help others the way you help me. No restrictions, no obligations. Her voice caught. Just plant more seeds, Fred. Please. Fred held the check with shaking hands, staring at numbers that didn't seem real. What you plant, Elena whispered, you may never see grow, but that doesn't mean nothing grows. You planted me 30 years ago. Look what grew. Spring 2025. Fred stood in the county courthouse in Ogallala, signing papers that established the Harvest Hope Initiative as a registered nonprofit. Elena had flown in for the occasion, along with lawyers who'd structured everything pro bono. Fred sold 30 of the 50 tractors for $3.6 million, keeping 10 for his own farm, 10 to loan to struggling neighbors who couldn't afford equipment. Combined with Alina's $1.5 million check, the Harvest Hope initiative launched with $5.1 million in capital. The mission was simple: help two groups: immigrant agricultural workers seeking legal status and education, family farms facing foreclosure or equipment failure. The people Sarah would have wanted him to help. 6 months in, the results were staggering. 7 families had been saved from foreclosure, debts paid, equipment provided, operating costs covered until they could get back on their feet. 13 immigrants had received work permits, education funding, and legal support through partnerships Elena had arranged with immigration attorneys. Every recipient received the same letter, handwritten by Fred. "Someone helped me when I needed it most. Now I'm helping you. When you're able, help someone else. That's all I ask." Fred became the face of Harvest Hope, speaking at high schools, churches, farm bureaus across Nebraska. He told Elena's story with her permission and his own. He told audiences that kindness wasn't charity, it was investment. Plant seeds, walk away, let them grow. The ripples started immediately. Tom Bradshaw's son, inspired by Fred's work, started a similar program in Kansas. A farmer named Sarah Chen, whose foreclosure Fred had stopped, used her saved farm to employ 3 refugee families, teaching them sustainable agriculture. Those refugees, once stable, volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, building homes for others. A high school student Fred spoke to started a fundraiser that collected $47,000 for immigrant legal aid. A church in Lincoln adopted the Help and Pass It Forward model, creating microloans for struggling farmers. Fred tracked it all in a notebook, the way Sarah used to track seasonal workers. Each act of kindness spawned more kindness. 1 became 5, became 20. The mathematics of compassion. By fall 2025, Harvest Hope had directly helped 43 people, but those 43 people had helped 187 others, and those 187 had helped more. The seed Elena had planted by sending tractors was growing into a forest. Fred sat on his porch one evening, that notebook in his lap, and did the math. 30 years ago, he'd helped one frightened girl. Today, because of her, because of what she'd built, because of Harvest Hope, thousands of lives were different. "Sarah," he whispered to the sunset, "look what we started." Fall 2026. Fred stood before 200 community college students in California, at the same campus where Elena had started her journey 3 decades ago. At 70 years old, his weathered hands gripped the podium, his black cap removed out of respect for the venue, his voice steady. A young man in the 3rd row raised his hand. "Mr. Hough, I have to ask, why didn't you turn Elena in? She was here illegally. You broke the law." The auditorium went silent. Fred looked at the student for a long moment, then at Elena sitting in the front row, tears already in her eyes. "Because she was a kid who needed help," Fred said simply. The law said one thing. Humanity said another. I chose humanity. He paused. "And I'd do it again tomorrow." The room erupted in applause. The story went national that winter. 60 Minutes featured Fred and Elena tracing the journey from that October barn to 50 tractors to Harvest Hope. A publisher offered Fred a book deal. He accepted on one condition. All proceeds went to Harvest Hope. Elena visited the farm regularly now. They'd become family. The father she'd never had, the daughter he'd gained. She called him every Sunday, flew in for holidays, brought her own children to see the farm where their mother had been saved. Fred farmed until he was 75, then semi-retired, though he still helped run Harvest Hope and spoke wherever they'd have him. By 2028, the initiative had helped 89 families and 47 immigrants directly, with ripple effects touching thousands more. One evening in late summer 2028, Fred sat on his porch watching the sunset, the same spot where he'd held bankruptcy papers 4 years ago. The 50 John Deere tractors weren't scattered anymore. 20 worked his own fields. 30 were distributed across 7 neighboring farms, keeping families on land they'd nearly lost. He thought about Sarah, gone 9 years now. About Elena, who called yesterday to say the Hope program had just helped its 200th young person. About the mathematics of kindness that he'd never understood until 50 tractors arrived in his driveway. "I thought my life didn't matter much," he said quietly to the sunset, words he'd spoken at a dozen schools now. worked the land, helped who I could, tried to be decent. That was it. But Elena taught me something Sarah always knew. Every act of kindness is a seed. You plant it, you walk away, and you never know what grows. Could be nothing, could be everything. But you plant it anyway, because that's what it means to be human. An aerial shot would have shown Fred's farm at the center, surrounded by farms saved by Harvest Hope, all with green and yellow tractors working the fields. The camera would pull back slowly, revealing the Nebraska landscape dotted with operations still running, families still farming, all because one man had helped one frightened girl 30 years ago. Fred stood slowly, his arthritic knees protesting, and walked inside. Tomorrow he'd speak at another school. Tomorrow he'd plant more seeds, one seed at a time. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that small acts of kindness are never wasted. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone helped you when you needed it most, or a time you helped someone else. Because every story of compassion plants seeds we may never see grow. But they grow anyway, one seed at a time.